it can be easy,
Mm,
but by preventing the pain and preventing the failure and making it easy, you're also preventing the magic. You're also preventing those moments that I was talking about when my hands were on my face and I felt like my life is over,
mm.
and that now I recall as the best moments of my life. You know, so it is part of the journey to not know how you're going to get out of this.
Mm,
That is where the strength is. That is where the magic is. That's
yeah.
where the value of who you are comes from.
I'm Michael A. Blunt, Executive Mindset Coach, and welcome to Wealthy Minded, the podcast for elite men who are looking for success beyond the money. Hey everyone, today I have with me a brother, a mentor, and a friend, Rodrigo Bellot, a Bolivian filmmaker, playwright, and neurobiologist credited with bringing Bolivia cinema to international attention. At age 21, he became the first Bolivian nominated for an Oscar for Best Student Film. His debut feature won 10 international awards and screened at over 50 festivals, while his follow up became one of Bolivia's highest grossing films. His 2015 play, I Miss You, inspired by the suicide of his closeted lover, encouraged hundreds of young Bolivians to come out and was later adapted into a film. Rodrigo has been recognized by Fast Company as one of the 100 most creative people and featured on the cover of Forbes Bolivia. He currently resides between Madrid, Lisbon, and the mountains of Bolivia, where he leads neurobiology retreats. Rodrigo, welcome to Wealthy Minded.
Thank you so much, Michael. And you are absolutely a brother to me. And I'm so happy and honored that you reached out to invite me to be part of this amazing endeavor.
Well, thank you for accepting. And I'm going to ask you a few questions. And just the way that you enlightened me during my retreat, during my experience with you,
Oh,
I would
thank you,
love
man.
for you to share your wisdom, your wealthy minded wisdom with the community. And let's see, how should we start off? You said that you've come from a place of no. What does that mean?
Wow, you've done some research. Yeah, I um let me just start by also I started doing interviews recently and explaining, because although I really appreciate people telling my story and my bio and the successes, I think it's also important to know, which I know we're going to cover, but I think it's also important to know, sometimes we rely too much on accolades and validation. And I've been doing a lot of interviews about neurobiology and mentioning, my master's degrees, where I studied and all those things. But I think the most important part of what I'm doing is my curiosity and the necessity to know more. And the reason why I do this is not to get a piece of paper, and I'm not by any means an authority of any things that I say or the things that I learn. I mean, anybody can learn from books and get a degree. It is that ultimate thrive for um, understanding the human condition and the human mind and the human heart, what drives me. And I think I want to start, you know telling that to people. That's what I value the most, more than my my accolades.
Mhm.
And this is related to your original question, which is, I come from a place where I come from Bolivia, a small town called Santa Cruz de la Sierra. And Bolivia is a landlocked country, and it's one of probably the second poorest country in South America.
Mm.
So when at an early age, when I was 10 years old, I told my parents I wanted to study cinema and I wanted to, become a filmmaker. And they said, well, nobody has done that, successfully. Nobody has been able to, you know, um, other than a few crazy men who have dared to do documentaries or, finance and get a camera and do a movie. industrially, nobody's been able to screen in film festivals. And my daddy even did the research because I was a very young but also ambitious kid, and so I was like, I wanted to learn where Steven Spielberg studied, with Robert Zemeckis started, like where Scorsese studied. And it's like, well, nobody's gone to these schools from Bolivia. Nobody has won an award in a festival from Bolivia. Nobody has won an Oscar from Bolivia. And so I always felt like no was in front of me, since every time they asked, can I do this? It's like, no, you can't. No, nobody has done that before. No. And it's interesting because at a certain point, you just get familiar with no, and you start losing the fear of no. And then you realize that it's not only about cinema, it's about politics, and it's about opportunity. It's like, oh, Bolivians don't have opportunities for that. There's no scholarships for that. There's no schools that do that. There's no, and again, not just arts, not just cinema, a lot of things. I would want books that weren't available in Bolivia. I would want things, and opportunities that weren't available for me. And so I always say, like, I come from the land of no. And the best part of that is that I became less and less afraid of no. And I said, well, if nobody's done it, then I'll do it. And that kind of audacity, and that kind of innocence too, because it's also naive, got me into a lot of trouble. And that trouble actually got me to become the first Bolivian Oscar nominated filmmaker in history, the first Bolivian to be in competition in Cannes, uh, and on and on and on and on. And again, the only value of those accolades and those rewards or awards or recognitions is that no longer nobody else would ever be able to say a Bolivian has never done that, and so that gives me more gratification, or than the word itself, is that no other teenager or young kid will have to face no as a reference. And so that's what I always say, like, I come from the land of no, and that's what's empowered me, and that's what has empowered so many people from my country. And I think now, as a openly gay Latino, Latin American filmmaker and artist and entrepreneur, I've always found that my limitations in terms of opportunity and lack of uh, those, or things that you would think, oh, nobody's gone this, there's no path for this, has become my purpose, and has become my motivation. And I am so thankful to know, because when I hear no, I know where I need to go. It gives me, it's my compass.
Yeah.
you know?
hmm It it sounds like you're breaking generational curses, and you're really pushing up against cultural norms by resisting, or what's a better word for that? Pushing through the traditional mindsets that allow you to become more expansive. And on the other side of no, and on the other side of fear, is always opportunity. And those
Absolutely.
opportunities give you those experiences that you were talking about, of going into these different ventures, and seeing life differently, and making a path for Bolivians that may not have had a path before. Is there any advice that you could give to listeners who might feel constrained by their circumstances?
That that's a beautiful question, but I need to preface that answer, because you're right. But at a certain point, I realized that I had done that. Early on, I had success early on in my career. I was 21 years old, and I was just already. And it's funny because I had the audacity, like I said, and innocence to say I'm going to be the first of all these things by the age of 25. And at the age of
Mm,
25, I was in Cannes, and I was already in Sundance, and I had already a nomination for an Oscar. And and then then I took upon that identity. I said, like, I'm going to be the one that liberates everybody from this curse of no. And and I became an activist, and I became kind of like a self-righteous, self imposed path opener of
Mm-hmm.
some sorts. And that's where I had the worst time of my life.
Mm.
And that's where I encountered my shadow, and where I encountered my ego. And I said, whoa, I am not this person. I and I got distracted from my path because I was a self-designated savior of some sorts, and I said and that just takes you to a different path. And I became ignoring my inner passion, my inner drive, my fire.
Mm.
And at a certain point, I was just doing all this for people. And that's when I discovered also I come from a wound of rejection.
Mm.
And I was exactly, that's why I'm saying I was doing this to help people, but also get that recognition of like, oh, you did this, you did this, you did this. And I had encountered so much rejection through no in my life that I wanted to change that and feel validated now. And then that is just as worse, as bad or worse than what I had before. So it took me a lot of pain and a lot of resistance and a lot of failure in my personal emotional life to realize that and this is where I'm coming to your question, the only true authentic path is when you're doing things for your own passion,
Mm.
when you're doing things out of love, not out of, and love starts with you. And
Mm-hmm.
love starts with taking care of yourself and prioritizing you and listening to yourself, as opposed to listening to the echo chamber that we call the world, and seeing like, oh, how are they perceiving me if I do this? Do they love me more if I'm successful or not?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think we're going to get to this a lot. It's an eternal feedback that keeps you hooked into this addiction of success and money and validation and love and gratitude and applause, and none of them actually mean anything
Mm.
if it's not, if it doesn't come from within, because it's coming from outside. So it's a trap where you have to continuously bring this. And I remember vividly and consciously getting to one point where I won the Bolivian biennial 3 times in a row. And of course, the first time was like amazing. The third time, I felt nothing.
Mm.
Because the fix that I was looking for was no longer there. And then I realized that what I was looking for was purely a necessity of validation. And so, um, and then I stopped doing things for awards or for recognition. And I said, well, who are you? Who the hell is this bald man? I've been bald since I'm 19. So I've always looked older than than I am. And so I was like, who is this Bolivian bald man who's, what does he really want? And it took me so long because I had no idea what I wanted. I just knew what I needed to do. I needed to be the best at everything,
Mm.
you know. And when I realized was exactly, I heard my dad introduce me to a friend, and it hit me so hard because my dad used to say, "Oh, that's Rodrigo, my son. He's very successful." And now, of course, we feel like really important and great. And I said, my dad is like saying this, and he's proud of me. And one day he said, "That's my son Rodrigo. He's really happy." And that's when I understood everything.
Mm. It kind of brings up a story for me, and it's not directly related to what you said, but it has some ethos, and I'll explain. When I first started working in corporate America, my first boss asked me, what is it that I wanted to do? And, I was working as an engineer, and I said, I want to become, or I am going to become the CEO of this bank. Now, mind you, this was Wells Fargo. So,
Mm.
and I said that at the age of 21. And she looked at me and she said, there are steps to get there. And I love your ambition. And oftentimes, between people like you and I, we work on ourselves so much that we forget the steps that it took to get there. Can you
Absolutely.
can you slow us down for a bit and take us back to the practical steps that you had to take within yourself in order to get to the place that you are now with this mentality?
That is beautifully put. And I would add on to that, saying that ultimately, the other thing that I learned at 47 is that it is the steps where the happiness resides,
Mm.
not the ultimate goal, not the objective. The objective is purely the compass.
The journey.
Uh, yeah,
Hmm.
it is those steps where, and so if I would have to take you to the steps, it would be horrifying because
Share. Let's get
because
into it.
it more than steps is missteps.
Yes.
And I don't know if I can say this, but I basically fucked up a lot,
Yeah, please share.
and because that's, yeah, I basically fucked up a lot. That's the success formula. Yeah.
Mm,
Do everything wrong just so you realize that you were knocking on a door that was already open from the beginning. uh,
mm,
and I think what happened is, and I see this happening with my clients and with people that I work with a lot. It's like everybody nowadays thinks they know what their goals are, which
mm,
are goals that were basically either learned from social media or at school or by comparison, or were taken by loyalty, by tradition from mother to daughter, father to father, and family tradition.
mm.
And very few people know what they really, really want, like the Spice Girl said. um,
Whatever they really want, whatever.
yeah, and even if they know and it is authentic and it's true and they really know, oh, I want to be, like you said, I want to be the CEO of a bank, or
Hmm.
um, I want to be a millionaire, or I want to help thousands of hundreds of millions of people. Um, the first step is is very confusing because you're always looking onwards and into the future. But the first step is to know where you are.
Mm,
And I always use this metaphor of like, if you're asking for a taxi or an Uber or whatever service you want, like most people know exactly, I'm going to so and so, but the application asks you or knows where you are, where you need to be
mm,
picked up. But most of us, I dare to say, majority of people do not know where they are. And
mm,
the brain is wired to overcompensate for your ability and your capacity. So a lot of people think it's easier than it really is,
mm,
whether by delusion or ambition or naivete. And that's why I said I was audacious and naive, because I thought it's like, oh, if nobody's done it, then I'll do it. It's like, oh, I didn't measure that it was something really, really, really hard and extraordinary to do. Um, but then what you start doing is by comparison, you analyze, oh, this is a perfect example. It's like, okay, who are the successful filmmakers? Spielberg, Scorsese, Spike Lee. I was a big fan of Spike Lee as a kid, and I still am. And I was like, okay, where did they go to school? They went to NYU, they went to USC. Then I have to go there because that is what I think is the path to being a successful filmmaker. And the first thing that happened when I applied, I was like, well, then I need to learn English because I don't speak English. I
mm,
come from Bolivia. So by the age of 13, I already had my degree in English. I was proficient in reading and speaking um, in English. So I was like, okay, that's the next step. And then I applied to schools, and I was, oh, but it's really expensive. And it's so expensive, nobody can afford it in Bolivia. That I need a scholarship, but you need to do an SAT. It's like, what's an SAT? It's like, okay. And then you have to have really, and the education system is completely different here. So you kind of have to go through in a year of preparation for an SAT with the education that you had from Bolivia, you have to go through high school in a year.
Mm.
again in a different language.
Mm.
And I did. And so I did my SATs by the age of 16. And, of course, my grades were not good enough to get a scholarship. So I had to do it many, 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 many times. And then I applied. I was like, okay, I'm almost there. I'm going to get into NYU, and I'm going to be a famous filmmaker. And the first thing that happened is I got rejected from NYU, and I got rejected from
Mm.
USC, and I rejected from all the school. Every single school I applied to rejected me. And I remember I was 17, and it was like, it's the end of my life. I don't know what else I'm going to do, And
The end of my
uh, exactly, that's exactly how it
life.
felt. It's like,
Yeah.
it's over now. It's over. And then, of course, you realize that there was another school, a small school, that took a chance on me. They were not known for film. They were upstate New York. I had no idea what upstate New York was. So I was like, oh, it's probably in the middle of the woods. And so I'm going to be surrounded by cows and
Mm.
making, anthropological films about farmers in Ithaca, New York. That was my idea what Ithaca was. And that ended up with that. And they gave me half a scholarship for the first year. And I had to prove that I was worth, getting a second half scholarship.
Mm.
And that's where I got to Ithaca College. And I was like, okay, I was just devastated. It was the best thing that happened to me because instead of learning how to be a filmmaker, I learned about social politics. I ended up, with African American professor that taught me how to think, that taught me how to stand for my rights, that
Mm.
made me realize how I was different and differently perceived in the United States, and talked about social issues and history, and got me into philosophy. And I was like, whoa, whoa, this is just amazing. And I had this feminist filmmaker who got me into feminist filmmaking and to anthropological cinema, and made me watch every Chinese film that I could, in the process, and really shaped me as a human being. And it was the second year where I got nominated for the Student Academy Award, and all of a sudden it changed. Uh, and Kodak gave me a grant, and then everybody's like, "You can have a full scholarship now, and let's." They gave me a lot more support, but that's where the mistakes actually started happening, because I was like, "Oh, I'm an Academy Award filmmaker," and I just produced so much awfulness. And my professors were like, oh, Rodrigo's going through that phase where he's going to think he's a shit, and he's going to crash in front of his own work soon and realize where the lessons are, which I did. 2 years after that, I was like, what am I doing? And it was by having mentors and people that allowed me to, they didn't prevent me from making those mistakes, but I just watched and saw, like, oh, he's burning and crashing. It's like, oh,
Mm.
he's gonna come back. He's gonna realize.
Mm.
And that was my life all over again. And then I made a feature film that got rejected by every single film festival in the world. And again, I was like, oh, my life is over. By then, I had no ego. And I was like, well, my dad was right. Now we tried it, lost a lot of money, learned a lot of things. Now I want to go back to Bolivia and I don't know, be a farmer or something. And then one film festival took it, and I went to the festival. The film won Best Film of the Year, and all of a sudden, everybody again won at the festival. Like, cut to me talking to agents and managers in Hollywood, and of course, I was like, okay, this is it. This is the
Mm.
Cinderella story. And I went to
Mm.
Hollywood, and I signed with a big manager, and he introduced me to Nicole Kidman and Heath Ledger, and I went to Adrian Brody's goodbye party, because the next day he was going to shoot King Kong. And I remember I was like, oh, I'm going to meet Adrian Brody. And I was at the Chateau Marmont with all the celebrities. And I was like, I made it. And of course, what followed was like 3 years of nothing. Nothing
Mm.
happened. Nobody offered me anything. I couldn't get a single film off the ground. And again, it's like, my life is over. I'm worth nothing. And I I said, no, this, I'm again falling for the same mistake and believing the ego. I believe in. So I left Hollywood. I fired my manager and I said, I'm going to build the first film school in my country so that nobody has to go through all the shit I went through.
Mm.
And we did that, and I started a film school in Bolivia, and then I was like, okay, this is it. I'm not gonna be a filmmaker again, but I'm gonna be the first who makes a film school. And then there was every single resistance and obstacle you can think of in a country that nobody wanted to sign their daughters and sons into a film school because film is not a profession.
Mm.
And then the funny thing is, like, they would use me. These kids would tell the parents, like, "Oh, but Rodrigo was nominated for an Oscar. Rodrigo was in these festivals." And then he goes, "Well," the parents would say over and over the same phrase, which is, "Not everybody is Rodrigo. It's 1%. It's just an exception to the
Yeah.
rule, and I'm not going to risk." And so, we were broke by the first year,
Mm.
and then we said, "Look, hey, we can't." We had only like 20 students, and the government wouldn't give us a license to practice as a proper university because film was not officially a profession,
Mm-hmm.
according to Bolivian law back then. This is 2005. And
Mm-hmm.
so we couldn't even give them a degree, And I said, well, what is more important than a degree?
Mm-hmm.
Experience, work experience. So if these 20 students would not get a degree, what they would get afterwards is they have they will have worked in a feature film, and then they could say, I have experience, I've worked in a feature film. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do we finance this feature film? We wrote a feature film with one of our students, and we produced the whole film for nothing, like
Yeah.
literally like savings. And we put all our savings so that people could have that work experience, and we were supposed to close the school right after finishing the film. And the film was like, gave absolute freedom to all the students to play, to challenge, to say, I want you to go through this experience that I had the chance to go through. Just like push the limits, everything that you were saying before. Let's let Everything you think cannot be done in a movie, let's do it. And the movie became the highest grossing film in Bolivian history until now. Still, it's been 20 years since that movie was shot, and next year we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the premiere, because it premiered a year after we made it in 2006. And it's still the highest grossing film in history. So that changed everything. And then after that movie, we had to open schools in 3 different cities.
Wow. Wow.
And then it's like, okay, once again we thought we made it, and then all of a sudden everything changes again. And then, had I known that in those failures and in those reinventions, and retrospectively retrospectively had I known that the magic of the happiness was in that thriving,
Mm.
was in that, like, oh, I lost everything, but I'm going to build it up again. And it never comes with the Cinderella story. It always, now that I look at my life, the best moments were when I was, you know, on the streets, like with my hands like this, and say, what am I going to do with my life?
Yeah.
Those were the beautiful moments of my life, because somehow, I don't know how, I was able to get back on my feet and reinvent myself. So it can be easy,
Mm.
but by preventing the pain and preventing the failure and making it easy, you're also preventing the magic. You're also preventing those moments that I was talking about when my hands were on my face and I felt like my life was over,
Mm.
and that now I recall as the best moments of my life. You know, so it is part of the journey to not know how you're going to get out of this.
Mm.
That is where the strength is. That is where the magic is. That's
Yeah.
where the value of who you are comes from. It's not what you achieved, it's how you got to it despite, and all the challenges.
Mm. Rodrigo, even with all the work, the retreats, the success, and even being part of your 7-day men's experience with Roar, uh,
That's
we
where we met. I'm kidding.
that's where we went. It wasn't at a wedding. We continue to face demons. Every
Yeah.
new level creates a new devil. What are some areas in your life that you still struggle with despite all of your efforts?
Well, that's the thing. Like as you get older, you think, oh, but I already know this lesson. Why am I repeating it? Why do I have to go through this again? And you just wish you could bypass all this. And I don't know where I heard this, because at this point, I was just so lucky to have so many beautiful mentors, intentionally and unintentionally. And somebody said, well, the minute you stop learning, you start, jumping to conclusions. And when you conclude, you die.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I was like, well, as long as I have things to learn and things to overcome, that means I'm alive.
Mm-hmm.
Because when easiness, the easiest thing, the most peaceful part of when there's no more challenges, there's no more pain, is death. And then the question is, are you in this looking for an easier time and less obstacles? Are you secretly looking to, you know, let go of life?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so my answer is no. I just moved. I've lived in 20 different cities in 8 or 9 different countries. And and during the pandemic, I made a decision to come back to Bolivia and move to the mountains, and I bought land, and I started planting trees, and I have 50 olive trees, and I have an orchard, and I have all these things. It's like, okay, I'm ready. I've done all the movies that I need to do. I just want to connect with nature and have a baby and write a book. And
Mm-hmm.
and then life was like, are you sure? Because I have so much to teach you here.
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to do that? And at 46, I took a chance, and I said, I'm going to leave my safety space, my comfort zone, and this beautiful place that I have in the mountains, and go experience new challenges and new obstacles, and go over it all over again. Because that means I'm alive, and still have the energy and the curiosity, and I still feel like I haven't accomplished anything, because I'm no longer looking to accomplish anything. I just want to learn.
Mm. It's perfect and serendipitous that you are on this podcast because that is the whole premise behind Wealthy Minded. Wealthy Minded is success beyond the money, beyond the financial means, beyond the status. And it was really inspired by my own story of finding financial success and then saying, well, now what? What happens
Yeah.
next? I'm not exactly fulfilled. It doesn't. It's kind of like when you said your third time of winning the reward. You didn't feel anything. I stopped feeling, and that's where my journey began of maxing out my potential, really wanting to step into experiences. And when I hear your story, I would love for you to share what was your transition of being in that comfortable spot and having success in filmmaking, then moving into these amazing retreats and wanting to experience this new experience and having your trials and tribulations with that as well, which is how we met.
Um, well, basically, what happened, I was just so blinded by the objective, by the goal. I was
Mm,
like, need to be a successful filmmaker.
yeah.
And obviously, what is a successful filmmaker is what you see out there and the feedback that you have from outside. And I always say this, I was lucky that all my peers, and most of my peers, um, by the time I turned 40, all the people that I, used to hang out with and grab beers and think about, plan about making movies and being successful and changing the history of cinema, all of them had either been nominated for an Oscar or won an Oscar, except me.
Mm,
And I was like, there's something that I'm doing wrong.
Mm,
Why all this, and I always compared myself with that.
mm, mm-hmm.
And, and, and just saying, making decisions that were driven by the idea of the goal that I had then, that was very different from who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to close this. So, but I had to go through a very traumatic thing, which is one day I was just mugged and killed, and I came back from, I was at the pinnacle of my career. And at that moment, I had just premiered Che Guevara with Benicio del Toro in Cannes Film Festival, and we won the Palme d'Or. And I was there, like in the red carpet, and I saw when Benicio won, and all the awards and all the applause, and my name was in that big screen. And I was like, "Oh, I made it!" And so when I was mugged in 2009, and they attacked me from behind, they broke my skull, and was left for dead.
Oh man.
And then this is I had 9 fractures in the brain, and I fell on my face, so I fractured my jaw, my nose, um,
Uh,
and and my neighbor found me in the streets, in a puddle of blood, literally, and called the ambulance, and they managed to, um, you know,
resuscitate you.
I sometimes resuscitate, and I was in a coma for 2 weeks. So, they called my parents and said, like, there's 20% chances, there's just such a severe damage to the brain, and there's
Yeah.
20% chances he might survive, and there's 50% chances if he does, he's never going to walk again.
Mm,
And we were prepared for the worst, and somehow in September, I woke up,
mm,
and I was faced with all this news. And again, talk about my life is over. It's like filmmaking all of a sudden had no spot in the priority list.
mm-hmm.
And I was like, whoa, now I have to learn how to walk and talk and move my hands. And it was a very traumatic place where I was introduced to neurobiologists and scientists and therapists and psychiatrists, and that's where I started learning about the brain and about resilience and plasticity,
Mm,
and how we can reinvent ourselves. And all of a sudden, everything made sense, and that's where my fascination and love started for the brain. And I started studying it, reading it for me, and still now, 17 years later, you know everything that I've learned, and all the work that I've done, I still feel like I don't know anything. And
mm,
so I'm always scared when I do a podcast or an interview. It's like, I mean, 17 years is nothing. Like, we don't know anything about the brain yet.
mm-hmm,
uh,
mm-hmm.
and so that's where I get my kick of, I just want to learn more, and I want to
Yeah.
learn more and investigate more. And that's when I started, developing things and studying. And I went to Holland. I did 2 masters in neurobiology, and then, ended up in, I was like, I'm going to bring neuroscience into filmmaking, and I'm going to help people, filmmakers, understand the psychology and the neurobiology of emotions. And it's going to be my purpose in life. And once again, you get like, oh, this is the objective. And then COVID hit, and I was like, oh, you and your goals. And then I was like, what do I do now? There's no cinema. And that's, once again, I was like, I don't think your thing is cinema, brother. Life's telling me again, it's like, stop it with the cinema. You have all other things to offer. And my professor said, like, listen, we need you. There's the worst crisis of the epidemic is not COVID, it's fear.
Mm,
And people need help, and they need to understand where fear comes from, and how to manage it, and how to administrate it, and how not to succumb to it, and in the worst moment of humanity. And I said, well, I'm ready. And I put on the gloves, and I was like, let's go investigate and work with people, and try to understand the brain, and try to understand fear. And fear was, I'm after you. And but mostly because at that time I still like was full of fear of losing my life, of what if I don't
Mm,
achieve all these things. Who am I? I'm afraid of not being anybody and not being loved because I'm not anybody,
mm,
and I have to be somebody so people can love me. And then that's where it hit, it's like you you deserve love because you exist, each one of us,
mm,
not because of what we do.
mm,
And I said, well, then I'm never doing movies again, and I need to, help people understand and see that everything they're running for and they're looking after is inside of them.
mm.
And the worst part is that you cannot tell them, because I remember when people tell me everything you're looking for is inside of you, I'll be like, fuck you.
Mhm,
What do you know? I would have,
mhm.
I know my insights. I know it's not there. I'm,
Yeah,
I'm seeing my friends winning Oscars left and right, and I don't have it.
yeah.
Um, and so it was mainly for an egotistical reasons. I need to share this in order to remind myself that that is the journey, to understand that everything that I'm looking for is comes from within. And that's how the investigation took me to this thesis, where I was mixing 200 years of investigation about how the actors use their brain to believe an emotion,
Mm,
to create a character, and mixing it with neuroscience and say, what happens if we do this the opposite way? What happens if we consciously train our brains to create a character that feels like a millionaire, that
mm,
feels like he has the Oscar, that feels like. So we started training our brain, and when I did my thesis, they said, "Well, this is interesting. You're mixing cinema with neuroscience. It's kind of odd, but you know." Why don't you try it with 400 people? I was
mhm,
like, okay. And I started calling everybody I knew that I admired and who was willing to test it with me into my home in Bolivia and in the mountains. And when I reached 700 people, I was like, whoa, what is this? And a couple of friends said, like, you should test this with people in Europe, or,
mm,
share with CEOs and
mm,
entrepreneurs.
mhm,
And I did, a friend of mine literally like just gathered. He's like, I know the 10 most successful people in Europe. They're my friends. He's a billionaire,
mhm.
and so it's like I'll grab my friends, and instead of having a barbecue, we're just gonna do what you do, and that's where the first retreat
Yeah.
was started. And then one of them was, the head of creativity at Nike in Amsterdam, and then he's like, well, I'm leaving Nike and I'm now going to be in Adidas. You should, I want to introduce you to the creative team that I have in Adidas. Let's do this in Milan. And so one thing like led to another, and I started doing retreats, creative retreats, neurobiological bioharmonization of the brain and the emotions. By now we've done it in 4 different continents. We've worked with men from 4 different continents,
Mm.
from Macedonia to Iran, from uh,
New York,
Algeria to New York,
Mexico,
and
everywhere.
yeah, it's South Africa and Sweden, and it's fascinating when I see it again. It's like, how did I end up in this? But what is really funny, and I'm gonna end my ranting with this is, when I said, okay, this is it. This is what I was meant to be. And that's why I had to fuck up so much in cinema. And I needed to learn cinema so I could do this in science. But now I finally found my path.
Mm,
And I finally found what I want to do. And I'm going to be a neuroscientist for the rest of my life. And that's what's happening. And just like, the popular girl that doesn't even see you in school and you bring her flowers every day, but she doesn't even know your name.
mm,
So I was like, I'm done. I give up. No more cinema for me.
mm.
And cinema came back knocking on my door, and all of a sudden started smiling. And I was like, what is happening? But you're the most popular girl in school. Why are you smiling at me every day? And all of a sudden, my career it just became I don't want to say easy, but it just became resistant free.
Mm.
And all of a sudden I signed with a new manager, and the people started asking me like, we want to offer you to direct movies, we want to offer you to produce movies. And it's like, what happened? And finally I did a film after so many years, almost 7 8 years without making movies. I made a movie, and I was traumatized, because for me making movies was resistance and fighting, and people
Mm.
like fighting over money, and like, you never have enough money and you never have enough time. Every time it feels like the world is collapsing and the world is ending. And this movie was like no shouting, nobody, money was perfect, everybody was loving each other. The movie turned out beautiful. And I was like, wow, you can do this without fighting. Maybe I identified myself with the fighting because I thought if you don't fight, people would not respect you.
Mm.
You won't have the validation. You need to be the first, breaks generation curses, like you said at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah.
And I identify with that, and I was emulating that formula. But then I was like, well, I created the whole formula in my head myself. And all of a sudden it's like, well, now I need to, this is what filmmaking is. It's peaceful,
Mm.
is loving, it's respectful. There's nobody stealing money, nobody yelling at each other, and everybody just trusts your talent and your capabilities. And tomorrow, I'm actually having a meeting with one of the biggest studios in the world for a project that just happened to come across my hands. And I was having lunch with a friend today, and she asked me, it's like, are you nervous? Like, this is gigantic, this is huge. And I said, let me check. It's like, no. It's interesting because if they say no, if they hate me, if they hate the project, nothing changes in my life.
Mm. Mm.
And that's where that's where it is. It's a constant reminder that it's not the movie, it's not the $1 million deal,
It's
it's not
yourself.
the studio. It's like I already have everything in my
Yeah.
life that
Yeah.
I need. So everything else is like cherries on top. And
Yeah.
it's like, whoa, wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah. You didn't
Another
need
cherry.
you didn't need that from them. It's
Yeah, and so relaxed.
yeah. It's you mentioned several things. You mentioned fear, failure, you mentioned resistance. I always tell people that, you know, non-resistance plus your goal equals the vision that you're trying to obtain. But it's removing the resistance between where you are and where you want to be.
Yeah.
And we have these tools. We have the things that we use in order to get to the next step. We have the thing where you stop and ask yourself, hey, this is my awareness. How do I feel in this moment? What do I want to do? So for you, for the listeners that are seeking success beyond the money and the status, who are looking for success with their families, with more time freedom, with their kids, with their spiritual life, with their health, with all of these different things, what practices or mindsets can you help them to discover their true wealth potential?
Well, again, it's another beautiful, phenomenal question. But ultimately, the answer is really simple. As you said, we have the tools inside.
Mm.
It is always going back to that. And then the rest is um, your, we were talking about this at dinner yesterday. It's like we have a body, and the body is a set of tools. And we forget about that. We think our body is the carrier of our brain, and that's it.
Mm.
The body is full of tools for you to do that. So meditation,
Mm.
breathing,
Mm-hmm.
movement,
Yes.
and then everything that comes with it.
Mm.
Those three things, and obviously the main one, I would say, nutrition.
Mm.
So when you're thinking about success, you're thinking about the steps towards $1 million or towards the Oscar. But the first steps is nutrition. The
Mm-hmm.
second would say sleep. The third is respiration. The fourth is stillness or silence,
Mm.
or both of them. And
Mm.
then if you don't have those four, none of the other steps are available to you.
Mm. That part. That part.
And that's where we forget. And so it is an important thing to remind that The first steps are within you and with you.
Mm-hmm. Rodrigo, what is your purpose? If you could give us your purpose, we can sign off.
I want to say something really controversial because my father struggles with it. I come from an incredibly loving family. And I, I'm a privileged, I excessively privileged because I had so much love. But as a child, and this is what's important to understand too, you're not talking about um, objective value. You're talking about subjective that comes from a child.
Mm,
So your perception or of the lack of love or absence of love versus the reality of that love in that household
mm-hmm,
has nothing to do with your trauma. It is purely perceptive. And somehow I perceived in my childhood that if I wasn't the best, I would not be loved. And
mm,
so it took me a while to understand. And I think that's what we've been talking about for this hour and so,
yeah.
um, which you so kindly have has given me. But ultimately, I realized if I felt like I didn't have enough love for who I was, and had limiting, I had limitations for being bald or being Bolivian or being, gay or thinking differently or not liking
Mm,
soccer. Like my father was a big soccer player, and I'm the first child, and I should have been a soccer player, but I hate soccer. So I felt like if I wasn't enough, which is this is where, and so my purpose is to actually bring out the love and the beauty of everybody as they are.
mm,
And when I realized that those are the movies that I make,
mm,
the resistance in my movies stopped happening. Because
mm,
I don't want to make movies to have success. I don't want to make movies to have money. I don't want movies. I want to make movies that I choose to make now with the awareness that my purpose is to bring light into the world and showing that in the worst moments, everything has value and everything has beauty and everything comes from love.
can I
And
reword
when I
that?
started making those films, everything worked.
Can I just touch on that for a second? Just reword it for just a.
Please.
I feel like your purpose is helping men to realize that they are enough.
I, I don't think in genders, so I appreciate the fact that I've been I've been working with men all throughout this past 5 years, and thank you for that. But ultimately, if I can help everybody, that would be amazing. See, it affects my voice. You touch upon
But that's
something
that's what
that's
I got
really,
from
really,
that's what I got from
yeah.
everything is regardless of what you do, I'm still enough. Regardless of the failures that I had, I'm still enough. Regardless of the things that I perceived that were missing, I'm still enough. Regardless of the things that I accomplished, I'm still enough. So,
And I can end with that too. And another anecdote because you're absolutely right. Um, when my father, as a protector he is, when I got the scholarship to study film, he said, well, you should study something. The closest that he could think of is like marketing. Marketing's creative and it's artistic,
mhm,
but it also can give you money. So you're not going to die of hunger. So he made me take two majors in the university, even though I had a scholarship for film. I entered the marketing, you know, bachelor. And when I was nominated for an Academy Award at the age of 21, I called him and I said, I just became the first Bolivian nominated and I'm leaving marketing. I'm not going to study marketing anymore. And he said, like, talk to your mom. Like, and that's the way he deals with emotions. And so I
mm,
was like, so he never felt like my father acknowledged the success. And then
mm,
when my first feature film came out, it was the first time that Bolivia submits a film for the Oscars for best foreign film.
mm.
in history. And I called my dad. I was like, I just, I'm going to be in the list of submitted films for the Oscars. And we actually got shortlisted for Best Foreign Film. And it was my first feature film. I was 25 years old. And my dad's like, talk to your mom again. And in 2020, the film To Me Monk that you mentioned in my bio was again nominated by Bolivia for Best Foreign Film at the Oscars. And I called my dad, and he said, "Talk to your mother," for the third time. And I said, "No, no, I'm not gonna. Not when. How many Oscars do I need to get for you to say I'm proud of you, son?"
Mm.
And he looked at me, and that's the only time that he's called me idiotic. He's like, "How idiotic can you be to think that I'm not proud of you since the second you were born?"
Mm.
Which was his way of saying, that's on you. You're chasing after the Oscar. I don't care. For me, you've always been enough. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, I'm such a fool. I wasted 40 years of my life getting to understand that I was already enough.
Mm.
And that changed my life because I don't care about any of that anymore.
And it is something that I want to leave this audience, this wealthy minded audience, this podcast with, is that you are enough. You have always been enough, and you always will be enough. And there is not enough things that you can do or accomplish in order to feel that way. It's something that you have to remember. And the
Absolutely.
remembrance that you just shared with us was remembering with your dad calling you an idiot, telling you why do you think for the second that you were born that you weren't enough? Like, these accomplishments don't matter. Rodrigo, thank you.
Thank you. This is amazing. Thank you for giving space for me to ramble about my experiences, and made me realize, also reminding me of what my purpose is. And as you said, be ready to receive, because what is a king but somebody who just receives?
Mm.
There's no doing in I always say that. What happens after you're a king? What happens after you're happy? What happens
Mm.
after everything happens? What if? What if everything goes right? What if you get everything you wanted and more? Are you ready to ask for more? But most importantly, are you ready to receive it?
Receive more. Yes. Are you ready to receive more? And a lot of people block that. Rodrigo, where can listeners connect with you and find out more about your work?
I'm on Instagram. Bolivian Bold is my handle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on LinkedIn. Um, I go by Rigo Bellot Machi. And I don't even know my website. This is how bad I am at communicating. Yeah. uh, humanupgrade.org is my website, and where you can find about the retreats that we do, and the work that we do with my partner Victor Perez from Ibiza.
I
And
love Victor.
yeah,
Yeah. Rodrigo, I will put your descriptions and your links in our description. And to the audience, to the Wealthy Minded podcast, thank you for tuning in to the final episode of season 1 of Wealthy Minded. I'm grateful you've been part of this journey. Stay connected, stay wealthy, and check the episode description for all details. And don't forget to please subscribe. It really helps with what we're trying to do. To catch up on any episodes you may have missed, thank you for being part of my journey.